Welcome to Bat Therapy, the psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown, and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
Yeah, so Superman Red Son is a comic by Mark Millar. It actually got nominated for an Eisner Award. It's a fun comic. It's a quick read. It's only three issues, and it's fun. It's fun. I like it a lot.
It's fun. I do wonder what someone from Russia might think about it.
That's okay. That is true.
I don't know.
That is true. As a spoiled American, I'm on the outside looking in.
This is one of those times I was like, oh man, I wish I had someone from this other part of the world in my pocket that I could just like call up and be like, yo, tell me what you guys think about this.
Right.
But it is very interesting. And you and I also, I think we've given away our age a bit because we talk about growing up with the animated series, Batman the Animated Series.
True.
We were not alive during the Cold War stuff either and all the kind of upheaval. So there's that too. There's a lot of things with this that you and I just don't have experience with.
You say we weren't alive, but did the Cold War ever really end?
Okay. Well, I mean,
Bat Therapy, a history podcast.
Okay, but we're not going under our desks because we're testing out nuclear explosions and somehow our desks would protect us. But hey, the live shooter scenarios probably aren't that helpful either. So
yeah, it's cold. It's a Cold War though. It's just like a bunch of passive aggressiveness. Just
which guy has the bigger missile?
Right. Yeah, it's Cold War. But so this is part of the Elseworlds theme. The big change is that instead of Superman landing in Kansas, he lands in Russia.
Well, he lands in Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so that's the big change. And of course, with it being Elseworlds, all of these other characters that we know and love also show up. Lex is in there. Lois is in there. Jimmy Olsen is a government agent.
He's so much more badass in this than he normally is. Although, I guess, a news photographer, he probably does some cool stuff with the photography, but...
but not... Yeah, he's not...
He's into all the muck with Lex Luthor in this storyline.
Definitely. But yeah, Hal Jordan shows up for any... Green Lantern fans out there. Do Green Lantern fans exist? Is that a real thing? Whatever.
I think they existed until, the movie came out.
Yeah.
And then they were too embarrassed to show themselves again.
Yeah, I guess, maybe.
Pour out a cold one for the Green Lantern fans.
What a guy. But yeah, the Green Lantern and all that course shows up. Batman's in it. He's great.
Yep.
He's a war criminal, but still great. We'll get there.
And you know what? I think Soviet Russia Batman is just more Batman than you could ever imagine him to be. If that makes sense.
That's true. It's like Batman, but with more vodka, right? It's like, oh wow, like what happens? What happens here? But it's also funny because Batman never gets, like, whenever these Elseworld stories come up, a lot of the time, Batman never gets lucky when it comes to his parents. It's like, if Batman exists, it's for one reason and one reason alone.
Yep. It's either you're Batman because it happened, your parents died brutally in front of you, or you're not Batman, but then you have to choose to re-traumatize yourself.
Right.
Either one happens.
Yeah, and he can't win because in this one, there is a Red Son movie as
Yes.
well. And I actually watched the movie and read the comic in preparation for this. But I think in one of the scenarios for this one, Batman's parents died in like a Russian gulag,
Mm.
and it just like set them off. They weren't subtle about it in the movie though, because in the movie you see an angry little kid in a cave, and then bats just fly from behind them, and I'm
It's in
like,
the
that's kind
comic
of.
though too.
I'm
It's
like,
pretty
that's on.
funny.
It's so on the
It's so
nose.
on the nose. Yeah, so just a warning cuz I think a lot of comic book lovers have probably read this if you're into DC. I don't know. But if you watch the movie instead, they're actually more different than I realized. I don't think I'd watched the movie until
They're
now.
very different.
Yeah.
They're very different. But one thing that I really appreciate about Superman, Red Sun, is that it's Superman doesn't in this, he, even though it's a very different setting and he is a different individual, his morals are still there. Like
Mm,
like he's still out to help as
yeah.
many people as possible.
Yes.
It's just he doesn't do it the right way.
So I think in my opinion, they did a better job of showing him maintaining that those values and belief systems in the comic versus in the movie.
Yes.
The movie, it felt like things got lost a little bit more, but to be fair, also comics and books, they can stretch things out more so you see more of the process and you have to jump more quickly in a film. So sometimes you kind of lose the um the minutia that's really helpful and important. But yeah, you're right. It's not that Superman is this entirely different character. He still really cares about people. He doesn't want violence and famine and upheaval and all these things. And if anything, I would actually say that this Batman seems more aware of countries and how people are doing on a larger scale versus the other Superman who fights aliens and
Yeah.
hangs out in Metropolis. Like this version of Superman seems more aware of the world.
He does. He does, and I like that. Honestly, he kind of reminds me of if Injustice Superman came to the same conclusions,
Mm,
but without any of the trauma and
mm,
without the need for violence. Because this Superman,
yeah,
his big thing is this is what's best for the world, but I'm not going to force you. But at the
yeah,
same time, I kinda am. And so
yeah.
the I feel like this whole the comic is really like has a huge theme of the importance of free will,
Mm,
right? Even though if even you know even though something might not be what's best, it the most important thing is being able to have the choice and not
and
be made to.
so this is where I can't help but put my psychologist hat on, but to be fair, maybe this is like a part of me that's more of a sociologist. I don't know. Like this kind of stems out of psychology a bit too. So in psychology in general, here in the United States, we've kind of been too focused on certain cultural facets and really limited and restricted ourselves in how we can understand people. And really we focused mostly on white dudes and then we added white women and then and all straight by the way. And
Right.
then slowly we've kind of expanded from there and we realized, oops, we can't just be focused on this one group and truly understand people. So even expanding though, because I've been trained in the United
Seems like
States.
such an easy concept to get, except so many people don't.
I know, right? Don't even get me started. Um, but let's even like I was trained in the United States and think about historical context. And I mean, we've talked before about how we are not a war-torn country.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying there's not violence. Unfortunately, it happens all the time. For the millionth time, we The one happening now is someone just rang the wrong doorbell, and was shot. Is one of the things reverberating here. So I'm not saying there's not
Hey,
violence in the United States, and
yeah,
I'm not saying if you're listening from the United States that you don't experience these things, but a lot of us don't know what the war torn looks like.
right. They're not
And
tanks in the streets or
right.
like, right. I know what you mean.
And even here in the United States, because one of the things that they talk about here, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of what they are saying, which is free will is important. And they're even saying free will is more important than absolute safety.
Right.
And so that I think most people would agree with. However, I do wonder, based on your experiences and where you live and how much violence and inequalities and things like that might come into play, you probably shift where your balance is in terms of how much free will you think people should have versus how much safety should come into play. Because I
Right.
think we can all agree, I don't trust everyone and their free will to make the best choices. We see all the time people make terrible ones.
It's a very good point. That's a very good point. And it honestly I think sometimes it can definitely come from a place of privilege. I should be able to do whatever I want to do, no
It's
matter
very
how
much the
other people
American
feel about
way.
it, no matter how safe or unsafe it might be. Like, it's just you can't take my rights away, no matter how it affects others, right? And so
And
it's
that's the
very
thing, is
yeah,
that no matter what you do, you are going to affect other people.
right,
Period. You cannot get away with that. Even if you put yourself away in the thickest of forests, no, you don't communicate with anybody. Now, I would be very impressed for you to survive that way, but let's say you manage it. You're still affecting people. What about the people who knew you, who might want to connect with you? Or uh, it's very hard these days to find a forest where you're not close enough to other people, where you're hunting your resources, you're taking those resources, you're affecting the person downstream from you, for example. Like,
right.
you can't have life where we don't affect each other. And I do think this hits on that very, very well, in terms of Superman saying, let's stop harming each other. But yeah,
Yeah.
where's the line?
Yeah, and the thing what's so interesting about it is super s- for the most part in this comic, like, Superman is doing the right thing, but what the first time I really feel like it gets screwed up is basically how anyone that goes against him, he
Mm.
turns into like a robot. Now
That was so creepy.
that's not okay, and it's so creepy because they have like gears on the side of their head and stuff, and they're like always smiling, and
And it comes out of nowhere too, where
it
all of a sudden
does.
they like sneakily slip in. And I think Batman's the one that introduces it to you, if I remember, at least in the comic, if I remember correctly. But you like start noticing these little things on the sides of people's heads. And that's the thing, right? All these Superman tropes in Elseworlds where things go awry, it always hits on these slippery slopes. And we find out with these that Brainiac kind of
Okay,
helped lean him in
that's
certain directions, but
that's the, he's the slippery slope.
yeah.
How many Superman stories do things go bad, and at the end it's like, wow, we really shouldn't have trusted Brainiac. We thought that computer program was fixed, even though none of us are IT people. None of us invented Norton antivirus. We were just like, oh, it says fixed, and we trusted it. Oh
Mhm.
wow, he's still Brainiac. How could this happen? It happens so many times throughout comics. It happens so many times.
You know, this actually hits on an interesting conversation that I was having with Bill about AI. Um, where, because, he's the IT side and I'm the people side. And so I think it was a John Oliver episode recently was talking about it. And we think that something technological is therefore perfect. but it's only as good as the information getting fed in, and we have yet to find anything that can be truly unbiased, because even if you take a computer calculation, it's written by people who have certain biases. The data being put in, can it ever truly be perfect? And so we were actually talking about maybe in the future, psychologists and other kinds of researchers might be there to try and help us use AI as best as we can, keeping in mind it's not perfect. And it seems like Brainiac might end up in the same thing where it's like, oh, he's super smart. The technology stuff is there. Therefore, there's like this innate trust that it seems to play over and over again, even though
Right.
it's a terrible idea.
Well, it's because I think people don't look at him as artificial intelligence as much as they look at him like, look, it's a Wikipedia bot. And like,
Yeah.
and they really shouldn't. And the same thing with Ultron. Like, at what point is
Mm.
AI like, huh? Because even Ultron's ideals, like, it's funny. Like, and I'm specifically going off like Age of Ultron here. It was so funny because he technically wasn't wrong. It's like, oh,
Mm.
my job is to protect the Earth. What's the best way to do that? Get rid of all humanity. I'm like, he's not wrong.
We are terrible.
I'm like, technically, technically he has a point. But that it's how you orchestrate
Uh,
it that really it's like,
well, and even, it's very interesting because so you have Brainiac, I think, what were they saying? He's a level 12 intelligence, and then Luthor was a level
9.
9, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was interesting because you also see Luthor really, they hone in on his intelligence in this story in a way that not all other stories do, where you really get to
Yeah.
see him running amok and
Yeah.
doing all of these hyper intelligent things. And the movie steals this ending from him, which I
Yeah.
don't know if I agree with, but the ending in the comic, just like everything else, there's kind of this thing of like, what could Luthor truly do if he wasn't so obsessed with Superman? But at the same time, is that spawning some of his just intellectual creativity and fire? But
Right.
in the comic, he actually ends up doing all of these things for humanity, which is kind of funny because, he's not the best person in the
Well,
world.
he's still doing it for himself, though. Like,
Yep.
that's the thing that's interesting. It's like, yeah, I cured cancer, but it's because I woke up and said,
Mm-hmm.
huh, I bet I could do it. Not
Yep.
because it'll save this many lives. Like, he's such a douche in this in
Well,
this
and
comic. He is like, at one point, my favorite, because in this he's married to Lois,
yep.
and at one point he just calls Lois up and is like, hey, um I need to figure out how to kill Superman. So for like the next year at least, our marriage is just like canceled. Okay, like, we're
It's
just
so
not
bad.
doing that. I'm gonna be busy trying to kill Superman, but you're great. And it's like, wait, what? Like,
I know,
what did
it's
he
so
just do?
ridiculous. It's
And
so
he's
ridiculous.
so he's so full of himself. Like, at what he calls the when he calls the president, it's like, I need $20 million and permission to drop a satellite on America. It's like,
President's
what?
like, okay.
Yeah, sure, man. Whatever you need, Lex. You're the smartest. You're the best. He's like, yeah, I just invented this tape recorder this morning.
Oh,
I'm listening to it. And I'm like, I get it. I
you're
get, like,
smart.
yeah,
Okay.
it's really fun. It's like,
And
yeah, I get it.
and
I get it.
usually they show how that turns him into a villain, and it's interesting that this story doesn't fully
No,
do that. He's
in
a more
this one, he's
complicated
just,
character in
yeah,
this.
in this one, he's just super smart. He's
He's
super
just super
smart.
smart, and he I think because he's actually able to make strides here that he's not able to make when they're working in the same country and on the
Hmm.
same side. Probably because they're working with the same resources, which I mean, I know Superman doesn't like use quote unquote resources much, but they're the kind of the us versus them. So Lex always in all these storylines, or at least all the ones I know, well, I take that back. Most of them, most storylines, it's they're enemies, and he sees Superman as separate
Right.
and humanity versus alien. But when Superman is in the United States with him, a lot of the people around Lex Luthor don't agree with him. They see
Hmm.
Superman as one of us and he's helping us. And yes, he's an alien, but he's one of us here with what we're doing. And so I think the kind of like psychological separation that happens with them being in different countries, especially given the context of those two countries and where it is in history, all of a sudden Lex has more at his disposal and he isn't having to do things in secret in the same way. And it really seems to propel him forward.
And another thing that's interesting about Lex too, because like you said, there's all this good that he ends up doing once Superman's out of the picture at the end of this comic. But you know how there's some people out there that they're fine with you as long as they feel like they're above you.
Oh God, yeah.
Or yeah,
Hmm.
they're fine with you as long as they feel like you're ahead of them. It's like when people are driving on the freeway and there's always that one person that's like, I will drive 90 miles per hour to keep you from passing me or to keep from having to let you in, right? There's people that like live their lives like that. Like, I'm completely cool with you as long as you're not ahead of me or as long as you're
Yeah.
above me. And I feel like that's where Lex fits in
Hmm.
to this, because he's like, yes, I'm the smartest guy in the world. It's like, yeah, but can you lift a bridge? And it's like,
Hmm. Yeah.
I
And
can't.
that's how
And I hate the guy who can.
he ends up experimenting on himself or,
Right.
building all these things. Yeah. And in this, I mean, that's still there, but the obsession feels different. And once again, I think part of it might have to do with the fact that he has people backing him where when they're in the same country and there's not all this other stuff that naturally creates this fear around Superman that he can take advantage of, then he's just kind of with the other villains who have their own issues and problems and whatnot. But yeah, I I find Lex very interesting with this, and you're totally right where he's used to being ahead of everybody, and he very obnoxiously is always sharing how smart he is too, or at least I find very obnoxious.
Yeah.
Because people can see that you're playing three actually, I think it was more than 3 chess games
At one
while you're
time.
reading a book, while you're talking to someone, which is kinda
Right.
rude, but I get it, you can do all those things at once, and you're creating a blah, 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 and doing this, that, and the like, we can observe that, we don't need you narrating. And I understand that part of the narration is because it's in the book, so they want
Right.
you to know he's doing all those things, but I think they did it that way on purpose, so that he definitely has this, like, narcissistic leaning where,
Yes.
um I okay, like that sense of I'm better than everyone else, becoming kind of reactive when it seems like someone's might be better. Um, real, like you said, that person who is fine with you as long as they feel like they're on top.
Right.
That doesn't equal narcissistic personality disorder, but it definitely suggests that that's a possibility.
Right.
And you're right. When Superman's gone and Brainiac's gone too, by the way, he managed to get rid of both of them at once. He surprisingly he kind of tones down. He's
Yeah.
like, no one else can even compete, so I'll just do all this stuff, I guess, for fun. I don't know, but
Yeah. Yeah. And well, and it kind of brings it brings into question how much, like, you can hyper focus on one thing and lose track of everything around you, because he
mm,
always had the ability to do all of these things, but he was focused for decades on, how do
yeah,
I kill Superman? How do I kill Superman? And on the other side of that, Superman is out here changing the whole world, and people are fed and no one's dying, and there's no war, but he's hyper focused on this one time where Brainiac shrunk a city and he can't get those people back. And it's
yeah,
like a recurring thing
yep. But
throughout.
isn't it interesting though, because like you said, they're doing kind of similar things, but Superman's doing it because he wants to help people. And like you were saying, I agree with you. I think that still rings true with his character in the storyline. Lex is doing it all to conquer and to be the best, and
Right.
like you said, all avenues point to Superman. And then after that point, it all probably points to him just wanting to continue to be the most famous person ever. And yet, in the end, Lex is more successful. Or at least the book and the movie suggest that Lex's way was more successful.
Right. But what's interesting though is even Lex's overall plan pretty much this is something that could have been solved in a conversation. Like of course there's this
Yeah.
climactic like battle and of course it's not even a battle because everyone forgets that this is Superman we're talking about. And in this comic, this is this is also a world without kryptonite. Like we don't see kryptonite a single time.
I kept forgetting that and kept waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, yeah, we this is a world without kryptonite. And so it's like, hey, let's send these Green Lantern guys all after him. And I'm like, yeah, because that always works when Green Lantern tries to go against Superman. But I digress. But yeah, it's like, and then it's like, oh, let's send all the Amazons after him, and it's like, okay, let's see how that goes. Oh yeah, he's still Superman. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? And at the end, it's just Lex just wrote him a letter, and he read it, and he was just like, oh damn, yeah, I
So
can't, I gotta change.
so in defense of the timing of that, because Lex said that the timing is different based on the movie or the TV show, or movie or the comic.
hmm
I am more a fan of the comic because I think the extreme just makes it even more of a oh
Well,
my god kind of thing. But it's like
yeah,
40 years in the making in the
yeah,
comic. I think it's like 20 years in the making in the movie,
yeah,
where all of this leading up to. So for anyone who might not remember, Brainiac shrinks Stalingrad and has it in a little glass dome. And Superman spends all these years trying to figure out how to unshrink the city. And so they're under this microscope, and this was also Brainiac could do his thing and have the specimen and all protected in the glass dome. And so in the letter to Superman, or as Lois shares the message with him in the movie, it's essentially pointing out to Superman that he is Brainiac, but for the entire world. He's trying to put the entire world under this glass dome. So in Lex's defense, because you could say, why didn't he just tell him right when he figured it out and didn't have all these years of all this ridiculousness?
yeah. This
So
could have been an email.
yeah, this could have been an email. That's the perfect meme for that. Yeah. Um, so it could have been an email. So here's my thing though, is it could be Lex being Lex, and maybe he wanted to see if he could match the brawn, because that's an area that's more of a question mark. He knows his intellect is better, but there these other areas that he could best? Maybe that's it. But another thing it could be is I think about what I do in therapy. And there's such a thing as timing. And when is someone ready to hear a message so that it impacts them in the most useful way? And so sometimes in therapy, we don't keep, or at least most of us don't keep information from you. We're not going to be like, "Oh, I know what's going to help you and I'm not going to tell you." We don't do that.
Right.
But sometimes the insights that we need to grow, they can be really difficult to hear, or it can require stepping outside of ourselves in a way that might take some time to get to. And so, how do you make sure that when you give a person a message, or you help someone kind of guide them to an understanding about themselves, it's going to be useful? That can take time. So potentially that's what was going on with Lex. But I assume he also wanted to test his brawn. I would assume that's probably part of it too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because he spent so much time. He spent so much time developing all these different ways, and like even in the comics, Lex is more or less responsible for all of Superman's rogues gallery because he's
Mm,
basically all of these
so
different
good.
characters that he invented or made in a
Mm-hmm.
lab to try and defeat him. Like Bizarro, I think Atomic Skull was in there. I think I saw Killer Frost was there.
Yep.
Parasite, like a bunch of villains famous for going up against Supes, and they all still failed. And it's just Lex just tinkering away. Just what can I do this time? And
Yep.
it's funny because they're clear. It's that they still have that classic like arch enemy
Mm-hmm.
type thing going, but at the same time, what's what's also different here is Superman doesn't have a lot of the friend connection that we normally see him have with
Mm,
like the rest of the Justice League. The rest of the
yeah.
Justice League aren't really in this. And my first thought about it was because of course like you said we did not grow up in this world, but like when you hear about like McCarthyism and
Mm.
just the insane fear of
Being
communi-
turned in, blackballed, and
communism and
mm-hmm.
Russia, like the insane amount of fear that was in America, it was just off the charts. And so it was one of those things. I can't imagine like not only being in fear of a nuclear weapon, but also, oh look, here is this guy that could blow us all up if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
At what point does the fear just change to, oh, but he didn't. So I guess everything's fine, right?
Well, and he even, per Lex's plans, he even saves people in Metropolis, and
Yeah,
he shows goodwill. And I don't know. Like, and on the flip side, isn't it interesting how accepted he is in the USSR, given they had this focus on okay, let's have more of a communist structure where everything is equal, no one is above, and then you have a literal super person who, I mean, granted isn't human, so maybe that's the exception, but has all these powers, stands out. And he even actually, I love it in the comic where he has this conflict within himself because people are pushing for him once Stalin dies to take over.
yes,
But he's like, but this goes against all of our values where there shouldn't be someone who can jump ahead of the rest of the pack. We're supposed to be on an even level together. That's what we're fighting for. He eventually decides that there are things I can do, and I'm tired of seeing this inequality, and our people are struggling, so I can help
right.
because of those superpowers. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, where on the one hand, okay, how long does it take for other people to see, hey, he's not coming after us, he's even waiting for us to join? And then on the flip side, there's a little bit of mental gymnastics you have to do to accept him given the values that he's selling when he is so different from everyone else.
And on top of that, we can't forget as well, like, oh yeah, don't disagree with them too loud, or they'll turn you into a robot.
Yeah. I don't
Right?
know how much of that would have happened if Brainiac wasn't in his ear.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean,
that's true.
dissenters didn't fare too kindly in that part of the world, not specific to the USSR, but didn't fare too well, actually didn't fare. McCarthyism was here too, right? So
Oh
dissenters
yeah,
in general were not treated too kindly around the world this
yeah,
at
that's
this point.
true. That's true. He
So
has,
maybe others would have gotten him there otherwise, but I don't know.
yeah, Superman has a lot better relationship with Stalin in the comic than he does in the
Mm, yeah.
the movie.
I think that's the
And
biggest difference.
yeah, it is. It is. And it's one of the things that I did like about the movie more because I was like,
Mhm.
this, reading it in the comic, it was just like, this feels wrong. This feels, it's just, I
See,
don't
that's what
like,
I liked
I don't
though.
like this. Yeah.
That's what I
Uh,
liked though, because it I think it fed into he was still farm boy Superman, and
yeah,
the Clark Kentism of him, where he believes in the best in people, and
kind of naive though.
yeah, kind of naive.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And
He's
honestly,
Smallville.
I also like Batman more in the comic
So
than in
good.
the movie too, because in the movie, Batman is just running around killing countless people, like
Yeah.
just blowing up women and children and museums and all that. And in the comics, he's like, "Listen, I'm gonna blow this building up. Y'all better get out.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because Superman's wrong. He is a maniacal leader, and I'm waging my own personal war on him." In the movie, at one point, he's like, "Everyone get out. In 10 minutes, I'm going to blow up the building." And then he just blows it up, and they cut
I
back to
meant
him, and he
10
goes,
seconds.
"I meant 10 seconds." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Oh, wow. You should,
Yeah.
yeah, right?" Like, he's like, "Oh, this isn't okay." This
Yeah.
isn't okay at all.
I don't know
Because,
how I
yeah,
feel about that artistic license that they took. Yeah, it does shift things for him. I mean, his character's not super involved in either storyline, so you can kind of breeze over it a little bit if
they
you're
did
not
kind
paying
of force
attention,
him
but
in there, didn't they? They kind of like shoehorned him in.
they just felt like they had to, cuz even in the comic I felt like it was a little strange because they show Batman developing based on Pieter killing his parents
Yeah,
due to what Stalin tells him to do.
right.
And that actually was a more Pyotr in some ways, and I know I'm butchering that name. I'm so sorry for everybody in that part of the world. I'm trying. Um, but he in some ways I feel like is almost more Batman than Batman in this storyline because he's pointing out the discrepancies and how you are very Smallville. You don't truly know what's going on here. The rest of us are having to deal with the realities of things while you're Stalin's favorite.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I thought it was weird because Batman's origin story was not centered around Superman, but it became that way and I felt that was a little clunky, to be honest. I
It
didn't really
was.
see how his attention turned to Superman.
It was. It was a bit clunky. And you bring up something interesting. So I said Peter. I just was calling him
I mean
Peter.
that's the English version, Peter.
Yeah, I went, yeah. I was lazy about it. I'm sorry. But he was an interesting character too because in the comics he is the illegitimate son
Mm,
of Joseph Stalin, and he assumingly like he's going to be the one to take over once his father dies, and he gets really upset because Superman comes in and he's
mhm.
just God's gift to Earth, and like I feel like
Yeah.
everyone's had that feeling before, right? Like I feel like the way he felt about it was warranted at the same time.
Yeah.
Like he also in the comic he killed his dad, but like
Which once again,
he
there's
killed
the
Joseph
small
Stalin. Like
okay, yeah.
right, like it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was his dad, but also it was just,
But once again, Smallville still in there, right? I mean, I don't think he ever put that together, did he? I don't think Superman ever put that together.
he no Batman. I think Batman is the one that like gives it away at the end.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, it was Peter's plan all along." Like
Mhm.
he's the one that gives it away, but even his fear of Superman, it matches the fear that everyone in America has of Superman. So
Mm,
they're just like, "Huh, maybe we can work together. We still don't like each other, but enemy of my enemy, right?" Like
yeah.
it's
I do wonder about why does it seem like we as people have to have enemies? I mean, cuz think about the whole thing is willpower, free will versus safety and all of these wonderful things happen under Superman who okay, there's a whole brainiac issue and Stalin and there are imperfections. I get it. But there are all these wonderful things that they kind of list off that are happening through him and then later through Lex Luthor. And it is one of those things where man, wouldn't it be nice if free will and safety could actually coexist? But it seems all these stories play out how it's not possible.
Right. It's and it, I'm not gonna lie, it brings up an interesting point because like so many times you'll hear people in like Facebook comments and stuff or wherever talking about like keep politics out of comic books and keep politics out of my nerd movies and stuff, and it's
Yeah,
like
but
they were
anytime there's something people
always
don't like, if there's anything people don't like, they call it political so they
right.
can shut you down.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, comic books and movies and whatever method, it's always been a direct reflection
Oh, yeah.
of society. And
Yeah.
you know, like even that argument now, like free will versus safety, that's something that is argued about in all caps on social media everywhere.
Yep.
Right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
something and it's an argument that they brought up here because I think Superman Red Sun came out in 2003. I think the
That sounds
comic,
about right.
yeah, I think it came out 2003. I do believe it was post 9/11. And so when it
Oh,
came
I didn't
out,
even think about that.
yeah, when it came out, a lot of people had like it
hmm
everybody had a different mindset after that happened, right? Everybody
Yeah.
kind of had this mind there was
Here in the
fear.
US, we definitely,
There
yeah,
was
it
so
shifted a
much
lot of
fear. It
things.
was a lot of fear. And so like you think about that and you think about when the comic came out and it's like, okay, I can definitely see why there would be people that were like, "Yep, Team Superman all the way." And on the other side
hmm
of that, it's like, that's not okay what he's doing. Like he's doing good, but this isn't the right way to do good. You're still doing good at the expense of other people and forcing them to live in a way that might not be comfortable. And so it's very,
And
yeah,
and can't we argue though that the world without Superman doing that, people are still forced to live lives in a way that are not beneficial to them?
that's true. It's very interesting to me how a leader will make decisions for people, and it still seems like it's all about how charismatic they are, how
Mm,
they're viewed. And the way I think about it like if someone passed the law and they had this smile on their face and they joked and everyone loved them, but it's an absolutely horrible law,
mhm.
a lot of people would be okay with it just because it's coming from the nice face and
Yeah.
not from the guy that's like just
So
obviously villainous.
so they've done studies where, so one example is people that we deem more attractive, we deem more trustworthy.
Oh, that's terrifying. I'm thinking
So
about James Bond villains right now. I'm like, oh no.
right? They get away with everything.
They're so good
So
looking though.
I actually, when I taught during graduate school, I taught some intro to psychology classes, and I was in the Pacific Northwest, where serial killers seem to love to be. Um, and I, because of the generation, I was able to kind of do this where I tried to pick different pictures of people based on their attractiveness level. And I asked people, which person do you think is most trustworthy? Which one do you think is least? We had kind of one of those systems you could kind of vote on stuff. And I had Ted Bundy up there. And I specifically made sure he was the most attractive person pictured.
Mhm.
And you know, for people who didn't recognize his face, like you saw that same kind of thing play out just in a quick kind of vote kind of thing. But yeah, yeah, you have all these things that affect what we believe about a person. You're quote not supposed to judge a book by its cover. We do it all of the
All the time.
time. And with Superman, some people perceived him in certain ways based on what his cover was, and then some people perceived it in completely different ways. Just how you feel about aliens, for example, or how you feel about the USSR, or like you said, there it's amazing what people can do based purely on how they come off and how people feel about them.
Right.
It's the same with like they try and predict how people will make decisions, and they kept failing at it until they added in the human factor, where
Yeah.
it's not all about logic. It's
Yeah.
just not all about logic. And I think both Superman and Lex Luthor would probably both be more comfortable with people going with logic. They lean different directions in terms of what they wanted, but they wanted people to logically think it through, and it wasn't going to happen.
And you bring up something interesting too, the human factor. People in Russia, a lot of them absolutely loved Superman
Yeah.
because no matter what he's doing in the rest of the world, no matter what he's doing to some of the people there, they were starving to death before he got there.
Yeah.
They didn't have anywhere to live before he got there, and now they have food on their table, they have a home, and it's all
Mhm.
thanks to Superman. And it would take a lot for someone to suddenly be like, nah, we hate that guy. He's the villain. It's like, no,
Mhm.
I was literally starving here
Yeah.
before he came along because, like you said, the human factor, what you can only see your experience,
Mhm.
right? You can only see your experience. I remember I I used to work at a late night pharmacy back in the day. I just worked the cash register. And people would come in there all the time and steal things, right?
Mm.
And I didn't stop them. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to chase them for headphones, right? Like, whatever, take
Mm.
them. But I'm thinking to myself, okay, if they gifted those headphones to someone else, that person's just like, sweet, headphones.
Mm.
They have no idea how this person got them
Yeah.
or the mindset they were in, or they have no idea how they got them. They're just like, oh, wow, my Uncle Frank just gave me headphones for my birthday, right?
Mhm.
These people, and this happens to us all the time too. These people, it's like Superman saved my life. I don't know what he did for you, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't be here if not for Superman, right?
And that might be something too that impacts, because earlier we were talking about how Superman has a more global mindset here, and more of an awareness on a larger scale, compared to him in the United States. And so obviously there are people who have food insecurity here in the United States. That's not a question, unfortunately. But you're talking about a larger group of people with starvation, and there were work essentially concentration camps and other things, and
Right,
these things that Superman drastically changed. And when it comes to Superman, if he grew up in the United States, he was saving people from terrible things, but theoretically those terrible things were like seen as out of the ordinary. Oh, this person like came and tried to attack the city and Superman stopped them, versus here's my day-to-day life where I'm struggling to survive, and he
right,
has drastically changed what life looks like.
right,
So he's more of kind of a life or death immediate response Superman in the United
right,
States. And that probably hits on how much he can expand and what impact he can have. Because
right,
yeah, you're right, the loyalty that you would build through that, I can overlook a lot of things if you're helping me with my basics.
right.
And what are the very things I need for survival, versus yeah, a one-time scenario, which granted could still be really terrible in life or death, but it's not, hey, he changed my very life as I knew it.
And yeah, and it's all about perception too, because like you said, in this, Superman's looking at the whole world. He's like, this is what we need to do. I'm gonna do it, whether people like it or not. And on the other side of that, Lex Luthor, even though they definitely imply the vote was rigged,
Mm,
he was elected. He was
yeah.
an elected official that once he got into power, then he was like, I'm going to weave and operate and do all these great things for humanity, and people are going to love him for it. But it was because the perception was he is a product of the people, right?
And
He
so
was chosen
Lex, yeah,
by
Lex,
all of us.
Once again, Lex's obsession with Superman, he has other people, he has a country on his side this time around so that his obsession doesn't come into conflict with taking advantage of the human factor. I mean, he even does he owns LexCorp for goodness sake. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously he does a pretty damn good job with it in other storylines too. But in this one, he is particularly prolific in what he does, and essentially he becomes the leader of the world.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in most other storylines. And really part of that probably is because that obsessive component, it aligned with the people of the United States a lot better in this storyline. And he was able to incorporate that human factor, how people perceive you, more into his plans against Superman. So he could just like build and build and build off of each plan and be even more successful.
One thing that does annoy me with the way this ends, and they do it a lot. The happily ever after ending always annoys me because basically they were like, Let's came into power and he solved all the world's problems. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, he didn't, because people are the problem. Like,
Well, they suggest though he fixed everything, but then, and I don't know how I feel about this storyline ending. So he fixes everything, but at least in the comic,
it jumps the shark
eventually
at me.
it jumps the shark at the end. Yeah, and it's like, okay, so he not only is he successful, but all of everyone after him, all his descendants,
Oh
they're
yes,
super
family tree's
successful.
just glowing.
Just glowing, but eventually it gets to Jor-El. And the world is so just satisfied with itself, and they can't possibly see anything going wrong, that they don't believe Jor-El, and he has to send his son back in time rather than to a different
Because
planet.
by then the sun has become a red giant, and
And no one believes him. So, I mean, it does suggest that humans get in their own way eventually in the end, I guess.
right, like,
But yeah,
yeah,
that jumping shark
yeah.
was
Oh god, that
something
was funny. I was like, wow, that okay, okay.
unnecessary.
What a funny way to end to end this. I
I
laughed
guess it's
pretty
clever.
hard at that. It was it was clever for the eighth graders reading it. Their their
Yeah,
minds were
yeah,
their minds were
yeah.
blown. And the thing, and but I mean that's what comic books are like. I mean they're
They're for us too.
yeah, they're for everybody. And so like when I read it, I was just like, oh, meh. Like I didn't really,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't like, there wasn't one of those things like light bulb, like of course, like that didn't happen. I just kind of chuckled. I was like, huh,
Yeah, yeah. So, I
funny,
mean, to the movie's benefit, they took that part out,
yeah.
which I was okay with.
But the movie changed up a lot of things because in the movie, Superman finds out that Joseph Stalin has the gulags that he's just
Yeah,
locking people up in, and he kills Joseph Stalin because he has a much stronger relationship with Lana Lang, or
yeah.
can't remember
Lana,
her,
I forget her last name in this, but
Svetlana or something. I can't remember. It was different. But yeah, he has a much stronger relationship with her, and when she
yeah.
dies, it really kind of shifts him into this never again mode. But yeah, it's a very fun comic. I had a great time with that one. Do we have a mindful nerd moment for our Russian Superman?
Yeah, so I have my comic book here with me. Eee, for those watching on YouTube, here's my comic book. So I was reading, I was like, God, I don't know what I want to do for this one. And then that came along to this one part that I was like, "Ooh, this could be good." So you mentioned, and we didn't talk too much about it, but you mentioned the Green Lanterns and how they tried to take out Superman, and how, of course, that always goes swimmingly for Green Lanterns.
They
But
did they did something.
Keaton's shaking his head.
They did something.
So the cool thing about Green Lanterns, though, is I'm probably saying something obvious for almost everyone, but they power their rings through willpower. And we're talking about a lot of concentration and focus and stubbornness, et cetera, et cetera. Really honing your mental prowess to be able to imagine the things that come out of the ring. And so essentially, Hal Jordan leads a bunch of Green Lanterns, and what actually Lex Luthor tells them to do is he gives them a design. So it's a box within an infinite number of boxes. Each layer should be 1 micron thin, so the entire structure is impossible to breach. And so this is what they're supposed to do around Superman. And of course, inevitably, one of them actually says, "I can't hold it, sir. My mind's starting to wander, and I'm thinking about a TV show I watched as a kid." So I thought this was
Like, I get this guy. I'm thinking about Tiny Toon Adventures too.
I thought of you exactly. Too.
Also thinking about Animaniacs. I get it, man.
I know. I thought it was such a great kind of parallel to trying to do mindfulness that we could do this, being the Green Lanterns and just practicing trying to be focused, and inevitably you get distracted, just like with mindfulness. And so bringing ourselves back around. So that's the plan. So you probably can't see it very well in the video for those watching that way, but yeah. So essentially you got a bunch of Green Lanterns, and you've got Superman in what looks like a green safe. So, as we always do, closing your eyes or just not focusing on anything in particular, sitting straight but comfortably, and first just focusing in on your breath, helping you to hone in on this mindful nerd moment. You can pretend that you're Hal Jordan, or you can pretend you're, someone else who is a Green Lantern, and specifically you've been trained to corral Superman. And just as I was describing, here is Superman, and we've managed to catch him in the president's design. So first, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on the box, within a box, within a box, within a box. And as best you can, just an infinite number of boxes. Picturing one box inside another, inside another. Superman is disappearing slowly within a box, and within another box. Picture these boxes as being micron thin. This is impenetrable. So picturing an impenetrable box within another impenetrable box within another. And continuing as best you can to focus on one box, encompassing another and another. But eventually, your mind is going to wander, and you're starting to think about that TV show you watched as a kid. So you think to yourself, I'm having a thought about a TV show I watched as a kid. And then you shift your mind back to a box within a box within a box. You feel your mind wander again, and you notice very intense fear and panic happening because you know what can happen. You think to yourself, what can happen if you aren't focused, and you start feeling fear and you're getting more distracted. So you think to yourself, I'm having the thought that I'm losing focus. And I'm having the thought that if I lose focus, Superman will escape. I'm having a feeling of panic. I'm having a feeling of fear. And with that acknowledgement, you allow those thoughts and feelings to pass by, and you focus back on a box, within a box, within another box, within another. So we're going to shift away from the mindful nerd moment. When you're ready, allow yourself to shift away from focusing on those boxes within boxes. Don't worry, Superman's not coming after you anymore. Congratulate yourself, pat yourself on the back. It's hard to focus and to bring your focus back when we lose our concentration. So give yourself a Green Lantern pat on the back first. And when you're ready, we'll come back to the podcast to wrap things up. So what'd you think, Keaton?
That was good. It was it was funny because I was still getting distracted because I was
Yep.
just honestly, I think what ended up happening was I would shift between think of a TV show I used to watch, think of a box, think of a show I used to watch, think of a box. And so like I
Okay.
was thinking about Voltron. Do you remember this show called SWAT Cats? It was like these
Yes.
two anthropomorphic cats and they had a supersonic jet in their junkyard. And I was like, what happened to that show? Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be thinking about the box right now. Like
But you did it.
I
You
did.
did it though.
I did.
That's the thing. Is okay. You thought about the TV show. And I even pulled specifically for distractions in this too. Layer on top of that any distractions you might naturally be having in listening to this and trying to do it. But that's the thing is that a lot of times what happens and could even happen for the Green Lantern Corps here is what can happen is that I'm supposed to concentrate. I lose concentration. And then we get so wrapped up in I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing that it actually breaks our concentration even more. And then that gets us all wrapped up in, oh, I'm distracted. Look, it's happening again. Oh, now you're beating yourself up because I can't do it. And you're feeling bad. And it can spiral. Versus what you're talking about. I thought of the TV show. Then I thought of the box. Then I thought of another TV show. Then I thought of the box.
Right.
So you kept bringing yourself back. And that actually is more of the exercise of mindfulness. It's not just about focusing in on the mindfulness. It's about bringing yourself back over and over again.
I like that. I like that. I also like thinking about shows that I used to watch as a kid.
That's fair.
Thanks for nerding out with us.
I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. Find me on social media at Crafting the Mind.
And I'm comic enthusiast and professional nerd Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.